Hello everyone, I'm Jack Fisher and welcome to my world. And like in any world, we should appreciate the workers who help it function and prosper. Their toil often goes unnoticed, but we all benefit from the fruits of their labor. From cashiers to plumbers to janitors to nurses, these workers form the backbone of society and civilization at large. While their role is integral, their struggles are often significant. Workers play a prominent role in everyday life and in pop culture. In America, there's this idealized image of a tough, hard-nosed worker who pulls up their bootstraps and guts out a hard day of labor. And they do it with a smile and patriotic zeal. We often glorify these loyal, dedicated workers, but we still stop short of pursuing policies that would ease their struggle. Hell, those who even try are likely to be labeled communist, socialist, or just plain anti-American. But this isn't about the complexities of labor relations and the politics surrounding the working class. I'll save those discussions for someone smarter and more qualified. Instead, I want to explore the pop culture angle of workers. Specifically, I want to highlight how we portray certain types of working class archetypes. Because those portrayals, as well as the kind of work that these archetypes do, reveal something important. It gives a face, a character, and a story to our perceptions of the American worker. It's not necessarily all good or all bad. Like workers in the real world, they tend to occupy the vast gray areas in between. But even within this spectrum, a few distinct characters find a way to stand out. They each embody a certain element of the American concept of the working class. At the same time, they both convey a very different narrative about the struggles of the working class. One of those characters is Bob Belcher from Bob's Burgers, a small business owner whose work involves channeling his love of burgers. And another is Hank Hill from King of the Hill, seller of propane and propane accessories and the assistant manager of Strickland Propane. These two characters from well-known animated shows are both American workers. But the context, story, and themes they live out are very different. And they can both tell us something about our ideals of what it means to be a good, respectable worker. King of the Hill is one of those rare shows that strikes a unique balance. It's a cartoon that depicts plenty of colorful characters, but none of those characters are so extreme that it seems like they can't exist in the real world. The show's creator, Mike Judge, has stated before how numerous characters in the show were actually based on real people he knew. Even Boomhauer was based on a real person, not only from a jumbled voicemail he received years ago. That realness extends to the situation surrounding Hank Hill and his family. The show builds much of its story, comedy, and appeal about how they navigate the various challenges they encounter. They do all that within a particular context. Hank is the primary breadwinner. Peggy supplements their income with a number of secondary jobs, most notably as a substitute teacher. And Bobby Hill is the son they're trying to raise and support in this environment. Overall, it's a standard setup for a middle-class working family living in the suburbs. But what sets Hank apart is how he approaches his job and hard work in general. He is, for all intents and purposes, an ideal American worker. That's because Hank Hill doesn't just work hard. He loves his job. He's genuinely passionate about it. Whenever he says he sells propane and propane accessories, he says it proudly. He doesn't just love selling it, he loves talking about it, espousing the merits and values of propane. It's more than just a means to a paycheck for him. It's part of his identity. And in addition to his love of all things propane, Hank is just as dedicated to satisfying his customers. He's not about gimmicks, shortcuts, or grifts. To him, a big part of hard work involves satisfying your customer to the utmost. Whether it involves selling them a grill or refilling their propane tank, the customer is his top priority. Throughout the show, the merits of this approach shine in many ways. One episode in particular in Season 7, The Miseducation of Bobby Hill, really contrasts this substance over style method of workmanship. In the episode, Bobby gets to participate in Strickland's annual propane sales contest. But instead of Hank's time-tested, customer-centered approach, he tries the more colorful methods of Hank Hill's co-worker, Joe Jack. At first, it seems to work. Then, as the episode progresses, the gimmicks start to fail him. When customers come with real substantive questions, Bobby has nothing to give them. And ultimately, it's Hank who has to step in and do the extra work to complete the sale, and, fittingly enough, win the contest. It sends a clear message both to Bobby and anyone else who thinks they can get ahead with empty showmanship. You do things the right way, you do them diligently and honestly, and you won't just succeed, you'll satisfy your customers and, in turn, improve the business. It's hard-working capitalism at its most pure, and it's a beautiful thing, I tell you what. If Hank Hill's work ethic brings out capitalism's beauty, then Bob Belcher's approach exposes its ugliest boils, wrinkles, and zits. Bob is a lot like Hank in many ways. He really loves what he does. He's passionate about his work. To him, making delicious burgers isn't just a job. It's part of his identity, and he wants it to be what helps him and his family realize the American dream. But unlike King of the Hill, the world of Bob's Burgers is not kind to such idealized notions of work ethic. This is not a world where success, at least in terms of money, is proportional to the amount of labor you put in. Bob works hard, there's no doubt about that. Since the first season, we've seen Bob and his family toil in their restaurant day after day. But they're still barely making ends meet. The fact he can't afford support staff, relying instead on the free labor of his children, is proof enough of that. Bob even says outright on many occasions that they're poor, often struggling to pay the rent. He's a small business owner, but in a way that's inconsistent with the standard American ideals of small business owners. Many people have this romanticized concept of what it means to have a small business. They're this quaint mom and pop store that helps elevate poor, hardworking families into the heart of the American dream. It's a great story. Plenty of American families have realized it, but throughout multiple seasons, Bob's Burgers reveals the flaws in those stories that often get overlooked. Now, Bob works every bit as hard as Hank. He also tries to inspire others to work just as hard, albeit with limited success. By most measures, he does everything the right way, making a quality product for willing customers. In an ideal world, that should be enough. But that's not the world Bob lives in. It's not the world we live in either. Bob Belcher's work is undermined by multiple factors, many of which are beyond his control. He has a wife and kids who don't share his work ethic or his passion for burgers. The location of his restaurant isn't exactly ideal either. He's also constantly constrained by rent, upkeep costs, and low foot traffic. His only regular customers throughout the show are Mort and Teddy. No matter how hard he works, it's just not enough. That American dream, the kind Hank enjoys in his world, still seems so far away. It's less satisfying, but it feels a lot more real. And Bob's Burgers builds much of its story and humor around those issues. It's what helps make the show work so well. It also makes its characters feel more relatable, despite their many eccentricities. While the show never gets overly political, it still sends a clear message. Bob works hard to get ahead, but he never succeeds beyond a certain point. He succeeds just enough to keep his restaurant open, but not much beyond that. It can be frustrating, but it's also a lot more consistent with how real workers struggle in the real world. Contrary to those romantic ideals about small businesses, most of them fail. Most workers in Bob's position struggle to get ahead. And it has nothing to do with how hard they work. Sometimes it's just a matter of time, setting, and just dumb luck. In addition to their shared work ethic, Hank Hill and Bob Belcher are both family men. They both have wives with colorful personalities. They have children they care for, even though they're often frustrated by them. But that's also a big part of the idealism surrounding the American worker. They don't just succeed for themselves, they succeed for their families as well. Hank fits that mold perfectly. His work ethic goes beyond providing a decent, middle-class home for his wife and son. He's a man who embraces that all-American, proud Texan ethos. He puts in the work. He does things the right way. He routinely demonstrates to both Bobby and Peggy the value of this way. Sometimes they have to learn that lesson the hard way, but they still learn. even if they tend to forget by the next episode. Now, Bob Belcher tries to fit into that same working class ideal, but his family simply doesn't buy into it. But it's not out of malice or disdain either. Bob's family loves him just as much as Bobby and Peggy love Hank. They just prefer doing things their own way, and Bob can only do so much to stop them. Tina, Jean, Louise, and Linda all have very distinct personalities. They also have passions and ambitions that have nothing to do with making burgers. Linda loves singing and music. Tina loves boys. Louise loves manipulating people and getting out of work. And Jean, well, I won't even try to make sense of him, but he's still lovable nonetheless. Whereas Peggy and Bobby support Hank's work, or at the very least stay out of his way, the Belcher family often complicates Bob's pursuit of the American dream. Their family dynamics are a lot more chaotic, and that's somewhat fitting. Operating a small business, raising a family, and achieving success these days is exceedingly chaotic. Working hard and playing by the rules certainly helps, but it can only take you so far. And in King of the Hill, that work ethic always pays off in the long run. It always rewards those who stick to it, if not in money or sales, then in an appropriate resolution to a conflict. The show builds much of its comedy on how far some will go to avoid doing things the right way in favor of doing things their way. And Hank Hill is usually the one who reminds them of how badly that can turn out. If Bob Belcher ran his business in Hank's world, he'd definitely be a success. Hell, Hank would probably be a regular customer. It doesn't have to be a perfect world for this work ethic to pay off, though. It just has to be functional. Now, make no mistake, King of the Hill is not a perfect world for a hard-working American like Hank. In some respects, it highlights the same flaws in working-class America as Bob's Burgers. It just does so in a more subtle way, but one that's nonetheless impactful. If you're a worker in America, or anywhere for that matter, the satisfaction of your work is often dependent on your boss. If they're fair, honest, and reasonable, you'll get your share of the fruits. The boss will still get a bigger share, but you won't be left feeling outright cheated. A great many workers aren't lucky enough to have a boss like that, and both Bob Belcher and Hank Hill are among them. While Bob's name may be on the restaurant, he's still at the mercy of his aloof landlord, Mr. Fishoder. He might not be the boss, but he is the one collecting the rent, and he can exploit that leverage over Bob and every other tenant in any number of ways. And in one episode, The Odor Games, he even stages a water balloon flight among his tenants. The losers had their rent raised, and the winners got to pay a discounted rate. And no matter who wins or loses the water balloon fight, Mr. Fishoder comes out ahead. That tends to be the case with the rich, powerful, and well-connected in any world. But as bad as Mr. Fishoder can be at times, he's got nothing on Buck Strickland. While Hank Hill loves his job and has a genuine passion for propane, Buck could care less about anyone's work ethic. He's more concerned with drinking, gambling, strip clubs, and money, preferably the kind that doesn't require hard work. Unlike Hank, Buck is more than willing to cut corners and break the rules to get ahead. Whether it's committing fraud through carbon offsets, to engaging in price fixing, to framing Hank for murder, there's no line that man won't cross. If it helps him get ahead, shirk responsibility, or make a quick buck, he'll do it without a second thought. And he usually relies on Hank to clean up his messes. It's a perfect manifestation of a boss exploiting his workers. Buck knows Hank is a straight-laced, idealistic Boy Scout. He also understands that Hank is naive, overlooking Buck's many personal problems so he can keep doing the job he loves. And even though Hank looks up to Buck, he's always taken advantage of. That seems to be the price he pays for being that ideal worker. Yes, he still gets to do a job he loves, but his boss uses that against him. And Buck rarely faces consequences for his egregious actions. Mr. Fishoder is in a similar position, and while he doesn't cross nearly as many lines as Buck Strickland, he does take advantage of his status as a landlord. When he does something that frustrates Bob or his tenants, there's nothing anyone can do about it. He always gets away with it, and he seems to know that. Now, he's never outright cruel or criminal like Buck, but he is oblivious. He sees exploiting his tenants as either a means of amusement or a resource to exploit. Such is the case with many working class people. They're often at the mercy of their boss, depending on their willingness to be fair and decent. And it can be a gamble, and sometimes you end up having to work for an asshole like Buck Strickland. Ideally, the goal of working hard is to get ahead. Sometimes that involves making more money. Sometimes it involves growing your business. Ultimately, though, hard work should result in a better quality of life. Even if you work for a lousy boss like Buck Strickland, this is a major guiding force for any worker. Both King of the Hill and Bob's Burgers reflects this in their own colorful way. But there are some key differences which in turn reveal something about their working class world. For Hank Hill, getting ahead for him doesn't necessarily mean more money or a bigger house. It just means being able to do what he loves day in and day out. By and large, he's already achieved this. That's not to say he's without ambition in his job. He still strives to become more than just an assistant manager at Strickland Propane one day, but the nature of his work is the same. He's still all about selling propane and propane accessories. In essence, Hank's concept of success means adding to the kind he's already achieved. Bob Belcher, however, is a bit behind the curve. In the very first episode of Bob's Burgers, he makes clear that the restaurant is struggling. It's not yet a success by most measures. He and his family are just barely getting by. Getting ahead for him just means paying the rent on time for once. Turning Bob's Burgers into the next McDonald's is just a far-off dream, one he can't work towards at the moment. He just has to survive first. Then he can succeed. Then he can get ahead. It's here where the timing of both shows come into play. King of the Hill aired in the late 90s and early 2000s. Both were times of greater optimism in terms of the economy. That old adage of pulling yourself up by your bootstraps still had real merit. Many still bought into it. But after the Great Recession of 2008 and 2009, as well as the bailouts that followed, that ideal basically collapsed. Now, most people seem to understand that hard work and toil isn't going to help you achieve success beyond a certain point. You either have to be born rich, have political connections, or be a ruthless business tycoon on the level of Steve Jobs. Neither Hank Hill nor Bob Belcher fit any of those criteria. But Bob's Burgers came out after that crisis had ingrained itself in our collective unconscious. Now, it's not overly pessimistic about how the working class gets by in modern America. It's just a lot more realistic. Yes, hard work will help you create a business, and yes, you can survive by developing that business. But you'll only get ahead to a certain point, and lately, it feels like that point is getting more and more limited. Such is the trend of working class America. Hank Hill is lucky in that respect. He can work hard at a job he loves and create a comfortable living for his family. Bob Belcher tries to do the same, but struggles constantly. It's a painful but relatable sign of the times. Bob Belcher and Hank Hill both embody the quintessential American worker on many levels. They're not the kind of rugged, muscle-bound supermen who carve their place in the American dream with blood, sweat, and tears. They're just a couple of honest, hard-working family men trying to make a better life for themselves and their families. Their respective shows each take place in a different context within the American zeitgeist. King of the Hill channeled this sense of idealism that didn't always fit. In a messy world full of Buck Stricklands, it's frequently undermined, but Hank makes an effort to reaffirm its value. And for the most part, he succeeds. That's a part of what makes him such an endearing character, and it's a big part of what makes the show work. By contrast, Bob's Burgers doesn't bother with idealism. It often walks a fine line between realism and cynicism. It's a world where hard work, passion, and dedication will barely keep you afloat, but you will be afloat. That's what keeps the show from getting too dire or jaded. Bob Belcher might not have achieved the American dream yet, despite all his hard work, but it's that same strong work ethic that keeps the dream alive. It may seem daunting, given all the obstacles in his path, most of which he can't do anything about, but he keeps on working, following his passion for burgers and doing his best to make it in this unfair, unjust, and often corrupt world. As working class men, Bob Belcher and Hank Hill embody many ideals. But throughout their respective shows, those ideals are undermined by harsh, real-world circumstances. And yet, it doesn't stop them from putting in that work. It doesn't keep them from pursuing their goals, which is still largely driven by the American dream. And regardless of how attainable that dream is, it's still worth pursuing. That's something that Hank Hill and Bob Belcher can appreciate. And even in these cynical times, they're a testament to the spirit of the American worker. Thanks for watching, everyone, and thanks for joining me in my world. I worked hard on this video, so please like, comment, and subscribe. Take care and stay safe.